This Parsha podcast is dedicated in loving memory of Will Sukenik, Avraham ben Velvel, who passed away recently. Will was a titan of a man, an exceptionally generous person, and a remarkable leader in the community. May his soul be elevated in heaven. It's a very exciting week in the Torch and Wolby families. I'm traveling to the New York City area tomorrow, please God. We have 2 weddings. Our colleague here at Torch, Rabbi Nadel, is marrying off his daughter tomorrow night in New Jersey. And on Sunday, please God, my brother Rabbi Zev Wolby is marrying off his daughter also in New Jersey. So please God, I'm going to have to spend some time with my parents over Thanksgiving. And we will probably fulfill the great American tradition. It's turkey. It's family. It's football on Thursday, followed, of course, by fistfights over toaster ovens on Friday. Yes, that's right. Discounted tchotchkes on Friday. Let's get into a fistfight with our neighbor. That's a joke. I've actually never gone to the doorbusters, the sales, but maybe, I don't know, I'll be in New York. Maybe I'll go with my dad, my parents. We're going at 5 a.m. to I don't know, J.C. Penney. What's the best place to go? Maybe I should. I don't know. I mentioned a few weeks ago that we moved to a different house in the neighborhood, and something very important happened this week. You know, one of the things that really excited us about moving is the ability to have room to host guests. You know, the previous house was full. You know, we, thank God, are blessed with a large family. And in our previous house, we had room for everyone in the family because we converted our garage and we converted our walk-in closet. And if there was a guest who was unwilling to sleep on the couch, we had no room for them. But now, thank God, we have a dedicated guest room and it's got its own entrance. And we imported plush beds from New Jersey, and we're working on a tiny kitchenette with a small fridge stocked with all sorts of cold drinks. And this week, for the first time, we had the privilege of hosting someone. One of the neighbors was celebrating a bat mitzvah for his daughter, and we hosted some of their guests. And it was really nice to be able to host other people in our home for Shabbos. So I want to do something a bit unwise, a bit inadvisable. And I want to kind of throw an invitation out to the larger Parsha podcast community, because my wife and I decided we want to have guests every single week in our guest room. So maybe this is something I should have waited to the end of the podcast, because as you know, when people listen to the podcast, they listen to the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20, half hour. Once it's like 45 minutes in, most other people just drop off. They stop listening. So maybe I should have waited to the end to announce this. That way we'll have only the real diehards who may be interested. So this is inadvisable, but this is what we decided. We want to have guests every week. So if you ever wanted to come check out our community for a Shabbos, see what it's like, maybe you're intrigued by the idea of going to a Shabbos observant community and seeing what all the fuss is about, or maybe you want to just hang out with the Wolbys for a weekend, let me know. We'll put you in the schedule. We'll roll out the red carpet for you. I don't know, maybe we'll record a podcast together. Send me an email, rabbiwolby@gmail.com. It's Parshas Vayeitzei, and we left off last week. Jacob usurped his brother's blessings, and Esau was mad, hopping mad. He wanted to kill him, and Jacob had to flee. He's leaving the land. Vayeitzei Yaakov, he leaves, he departs. Beersheva, he departs the land of Israel, and he's heading east to Mesopotamia. He's going to find refuge. He's going, please God, also to find a wife from the family of his mother, Rebecca. And he stops off at Mount Moriah, and he spends the night there, and he has an amazing dream, and he makes a promise to God. And then he continues his travel. He arrives east. He heads to the well. There's a big stone upon the well. He rolls it off. When he sees Rachel, he meets Laban, his uncle, and he agrees to work for 7 years for the rights to marry Rachel, Laban's younger daughter. Laban had a second daughter, Leah, and she was older. And the plan was that Leah, the older one, would marry Esau, the older one, and Rachel, the younger one, would marry Jacob, the younger one. But Leah, her eyes were tender. She was crying. She was begging Almighty God to not fall into the lot of Esau. But that wasn't the plan. Jacob comes and says, "Okay, I'll do it. I'll agree to work for 7 years to marry Rachel, your younger daughter." So Jacob works for 7 years, and Laban, of course, the wily trickster that he is, he pulls a fast one. At the end of 7 years of dedicated work, it's time for a wedding, the wedding of Jacob and Rachel. What do you know? A switcheroo. Laban swaps in his other daughter, Leah, in place of Rachel. In the morning, Jacob discovers the deception. "Why did you trick me?" Well, that's the policy. We have to marry off the older one before the younger one. But I'll happily give you Rachel as well in exchange for 7 more years of work. And there's a certain irony the commentaries point out that Jacob, he impersonated his brother. And he went to his father and says, "I am Esau." And of course, he had his reasons why he did it, and it was all guided by Rebekah and the prophecy and so on. But there was a bit of a deception of siblings, and he himself was a recipient of a similar sort of deception. Jacob works for 14 years for the rights to marry the 2 daughters of Laban, and he works for 6 more years for pay. Over the course of those 6 years, Laban constantly was switching the terms of the agreement. He switched it 100 times. He is nonstop scheming, plotting, conniving of ways to deceive, to steal, to thwart Jacob. But God protected him, and eventually all the wealth made its way to Jacob. Notwithstanding Laban's malevolent miscreants, Jacob became very wealthy. Over the course of these 20 years, Jacob marries Leah and Rachel and the 2 maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah. He has 11 sons and 1 daughter, Dinah. And at the end of the Parsha, he decides it's time for him to leave. And knowing that Laban will not allow him to leave and will try to steal everything from him, Jacob decides to abscond. They take all their stuff and they leave. And Rachel takes the idol of Laban, her father. He's doing idolatry. Let's take it away from him. Laban discovers that Jacob and co fled. He pursues them. They have a final standoff. God tells Laban in a dream, "Don't mess with Jacob." And they have a final showdown. Laban can't find his idol. He can't find anything, not even a single thing that belongs to him. They amicably depart from each other. The Parsha takes 20 years from beginning to end, the 20 years that Jacob had to wrestle with, tangle with his uncle and his father-in-law, Laban, and he emerges unscathed, both spiritually and materially. And the Parsha concludes with Jacob heading back to Canaan, where Esau remains, still hopping, piping mad over the usurpation of the blessings 34 years prior. That's the Parsha, and it's year 10 of the Parsha podcast. So let's go a bit deeper. Let's go backstage. Will you join me? Let's go backstage. The Parsha begins with Jacob's journey to the east. Vayeitzei Yaakov. Jacob left. He departed Beersheba. Vayelech Haran. He went to Haran. So the verse is not only talking about his journey, his destination, it's also talking about his point of origin. He departed from Beersheba. Vayeitzei Yaakov Beersheba. He departed Beersheba and he went to Haran. And Rashi asks the question, this verse could have been shortened. If the verse simply said, Vayelech Yaakov Harana, Jacob went to Haran, I would know that of course he departed Beersheba. Obviously, that's where he was, and that must be where he departed from. So why does it have to mention these first words that Jacob departed from Beersheba? A sharp question. And Rashi says a very interesting answer. This teaches us that the departure of the righteous, when the righteous leave a place, it makes an impact. Because when there's a righteous person in the city, that righteous person is the glory, is the splendor, is the beauty of a city. And when they depart, when the righteous depart from the city, well, then the beauty departs, the splendor departs, the glory departs. And therefore, the Torah is telling us, he left. And that's a big deal. The Torah says he left. Oh no, there was a certain vacuum that was created. They had this beacon in Beersheba, and now he left. And the Torah, it's such a big event. The Torah mentions it. When most people leave, they're not really missed. People move on. Even important people. Even the movers and the shakers. But Jacob is one of the greatest people who ever lived. His visage is etched into God's throne of glory. He triumphs over angels. He actually has angels do his bidding. He tells angels what to do. Everyone else, when they see an angel, they get instruction. He's directing the angels to do his bidding. He is the choicest of the forefathers. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who's the greatest? Who's the choicest? It's Jacob. He's the forefather who merits having 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. When he leaves, it makes an enormous impact. The departure of the righteous makes an impact. When he's there, he's the splendor, he's the glory, he's the beauty of a place. And he departs. The splendor, the glory, the luster of a place, of the place that he departed from, are diminished. Jacob's presence uplifted his location, elevated, edified the place that he was. Now he leaves. The Torah tells us, Vayeitzei Yaakov, Jacob departed from Beersheba. Now what exactly does this mean? That Jacob makes an impact on the place. So let's put that aside. We'll get back to it in just a bit. Now, on the way to Haran, Jacob has a very dramatic pit stop. He stops off at Mount Moriah. He's there to pray. This is where Abraham prayed. This is where Isaac prayed. This is the holiest place in the world. This is the place where the first temple was built, the second temple was built, and please God, the third temple will be built. This is the gateway to heaven. The words of Jacob. All prayers, if they are to ascend to heaven, they must first travel to this spot before ascending to heaven. Jacob prays there, and then he has to go to sleep because it was dark. And he placed some stones around his head to protect him. And he had a dream, a dramatic dream. He saw a ladder rooted in the ground, but the head of the ladder is in the heavens. And there are angels of God ascending and descending the ladder. And God appeared to him. And he gets a wonderful blessing. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. The land that you are resting upon, I shall give it to you and your descendants. That's an amazing blessing. Jacob is told that he will inherit the land of Canaan, the Holy Land. And then God continued, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will proliferate in every direction, north, south, east, west. More precisely, west, east, north, south. And all the families of the land will be blessed through you and your descendants. And the blessing continues. And behold, I will be with you. Ushmarticha, and I will guard you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will never leave you. It's an amazing blessing. And Jacob woke up in the morning, and he declares, this is the house of God, this is the gateway to heaven. And he took the stone that he placed on his head, and he poured oil on it. He consecrated it, he anointed it, and he designated it as the foundation stone of the temple. And indeed, 740 plus years later, when King Solomon built the temple on this very spot, Jacob's stone lied at the foundation of the house of God. Now, eagle-eyed readers of the Torah will notice something very interesting. Before Jacob went to sleep, he placed stones around his head. And in the morning, he took the stone. How did the avnei hamakom, the stones of the place, become the even, the singular stone? So Rashi tells us something fascinating. He took the stones. According to the Midrash, it was either 12 stones or 2 stones or 3 stones. He took the stones and placed them on his head. And the stones began to fight and argue. Each stone said, I want to be the one that's closest to Jacob's head. I want to be the pillow of Jacob. And therefore, God fused and merged and morphed the stones into one. And that's why it starts off at night. He goes to sleep with stones around his head. And in the morning, he takes the even, the stone. A fascinating and quite peculiar idea here in Rashi. What does this mean? The stones are fighting. Each stone, well, I want to be the one upon which the tzaddik places his hand, the righteous one places his head. I want to be the tzaddik pillow. What does this mean? There's a very powerful idea over here. Humans have the ability to influence their surroundings, for good and for bad. So you recall, of course, the flood. God tells Noah, I'm going to destroy the world. Why? Because all flesh became corrupted. And as it tells all flesh, not just humans. Humans were corrupt, of course. We know humans could do terrible things. We know that. But the animals began to interbreed. And even the land began to produce different crops than what was planted. Now, of course, animals and land don't have free will. How did they become corrupted? They became corrupted. They were impacted. They were influenced negatively by the people. People can influence their surroundings for bad, but also for good. When you have a very elevated person, it changes everyone and everything in their environment. They exude holiness that affects not just them, but everything around them. It's possible for one person to affect the entire world. The Talmud talks about some of the sages that over the course of their entire lifetimes, there wasn't even a single rainbow. Why not? Because a rainbow, that's a sign that God will not destroy the world, even though there may be grounds to destroy the world. He's not going to do it because of his promise. So if someone is so righteous, they can really save the entire world, and therefore they could prevent the world from becoming corrupted, and therefore there's no need for the lesson of the rainbow. So some sages are documented to have lived an entire lifetime without a single rainbow appearing, because they just brought so much holiness to the whole world. If you have such a beacon of holiness that will just cascade and ripple out to the whole world, it will affect everyone and everything around them. The 19th century was a difficult century for the Jewish people for a variety of reasons, but from a spiritual perspective, it was a century of all sorts of movements of rebellion against Torah. And it came with all sorts of different flavors and colors. But it was a real crisis. Maybe it still is. Because there were some pockets of Jews that were very committed and very loyal to God and his Torah, and many other large swaths of the nation abandoned God and abandoned the Torah. And there were major dilemmas what to do about this. And Rabbi Israel Salanter, he used to tell the pious and righteous Jews of Lithuania, he would say to them, if you're elevated and you're refined and dedicated and determined in your service of God, then the faraway Jews in Paris, in Frankfurt, in Berlin, those people will not repudiate their religion because of you. Holiness spreads like a contagion. A person becomes holy and elevated and transformed, they change, of course. But that's contagious. It spreads to everyone around them. Jacob was so holy, was so elevated, was so pure, was so righteous, was so refined that his holiness spilled over from him to everyone and everything in his environment. He goes to sleep, and there are some ordinary, lifeless, inanimate rocks. And if you and I were there, and we took a little picnic there, we took a little nap, the rocks would not know of our existence. And they certainly won't jostle. But suddenly, when Jacob's there, these rocks become desirous of having a connection with holiness. So they jostle and fight and bicker. Who's going to be Jacob's pillow? That is the force of holiness that was Jacob. When he was in a city, the impact was palpable. He was the glory. He was the splendor. He was the beauty of the city. The whole city was impacted by Jacob. Jacob could be in his tent, studying Torah, and all the people in the environs would be transformed. And they would have no idea that the elevation came from Jacob, but they would be transformed and elevated nonetheless. Vayeitzei, he departed. It was a significant blow to the city. If he could bring spirituality and holiness to rocks, to sediment, to stones, just imagine what he can do for people. And I want to examine something very interesting based upon this concept. Being around Jacob, it was the ultimate cheat code. If you're near the person who can just spread holiness and spirituality to the rocks, to the stones, imagine what it was like to be a person around him. And we have our Parsha, and last week's Parsha, and a bit of next week's Parsha too. And it's focused entirely on Jacob's interactions with people who were immune to Jacob. Last week, it's the whole Parsha is about the interaction of the sons of Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Esau. And this is Parsha. It's 20 years, Jacob with Laban. They both spent a lot of time with Jacob. The Jacob that could find the holiness in the stones is spending 20 years with Laban and many more years with Esau. Esau is Jacob's twin. There's no closer relationship. Together in utero. Esau is unmoved. Jacob lives with Laban for 20 years. He marries his daughters. He gives him grandchildren. But Laban remains rotten to the core. Laban is considered one of the worst villains. In fact, during the Haggadah, we say that Pharaoh was bad, but you know what was worse than Pharaoh? The genocidal maniac who enslaved us? Even worse is Laban. Now, both of these antagonists, they had a false patina of righteousness. Esau is saying, how can I tithe salt? How can I tithe hay? And he's a trickster. He's deceptive in how he treats his father. Oh, my father was 40 when he got married. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to emulate Isaac as if. And Laban, you read his story, he's always invoking the name of God. And he tells Eliezer, I cleaned a house out of idolatry. And he tells Eliezer, I cannot question this match. It came from God. And he tells Jacob in our Parsha, I clairvoyantly know that all my wealth comes from you. Laban seems to be very righteous on some level, but he remains a villain, and he's not moved an iota thanks to his interaction and proximity to Jacob. How is it that Jacob could find holiness in stones, in inanimate stones, but his incredible force of personality and holiness cannot move not Esau and not Laban? They're both immune to Jacob. They're resistant to Jacob. Jacob spends one night on a mountaintop, and suddenly stones that were there since creation, you imagine, they become desirous of spirituality. They start fighting and bickering because they want to have a close connection with the righteous one. And Jacob spends 20 years with Laban and 60 plus years with Esau, and they're not elevated, and they're not moved, and they remain unchanged. We have a whole Parsha. Last week, Jacob and Esau. This week, Jacob and Laban. And these villains are not impacted. The whole city is impacted by Jacob. The stones around them are impacted by Jacob, but not Laban and not Esau. It seems that there's something about these two people that prevents them from being impacted by Jacob. The stone it's not resistant. Stone is not holy. You look at a stone, there's nothing there. You could put it in a corner and come back 5,000 years later, and it'll be, unless someone moved it, it'll just be there. And you won't notice any difference with it. And you could talk to it and study Talmud with it for 1,000 years. It won't move. It's just bereft of holiness. But maybe there's something there. And Jacob was able to elicit that. The stone doesn't have innate holiness that we can perceive, but at least it's not resistant to Jacob. Jacob takes the stone, pours oil in it, and this stone becomes the foundation of the temple. It doesn't resist. There's this big stone atop the well. Jacob arrives at the well, there's a stone there. It's big, it's hard to move, but if you move it, it'll move. The stone is almost like willing to accept Jacob. Laban and Esau are actively resisting Jacob. They're counteracting Jacob. Jacob can move mountains, but he can't move Esau and Laban because they are resisting. Now, how exactly are Esau and Laban resisting Jacob? If you look at their stories, it's easy to see some overlaps. Esau is described as kitzayed befiv. He's deceptive. He's a trickster. He's deceiving his father. And of course, Laban is also deceptive. Of course you can marry Rachel. No problem. 7 years of work. And of course, he supplants her with Leah. And when he works for pay, Laban switches Jacob's terms 100 times. So maybe that's the overlap. Maybe deception makes a person resistant to an otherwise overwhelming force of holiness. I want to suggest maybe an approach. Jacob was a fountain of holiness. It was basically almost impossible to resist. If there was a stone completely devoid of any apparent scintilla of holiness, just being around Jacob for a few hours will turn it into this ferocious fighter desirous of holiness. But there are two ways that someone can become immune to such a force. There's the resistance of Esau and the resistance of Laban. Why was Esau called Esau? The verse tells us Esau was born. He was admoni. He was ruddy. He was almost like a blanket, thick blanket, very hairy. Vayikru shmo Esau, and they called him Esau. What is the connection between him being ruddy and hairy? What is that connection between that and his name Esau? So Rashi tells us something very interesting. The word Esau, it's like asui, which means made. Esau was made and was finished with his hair, as if it was very old. Babies are born very often and they're bald. Why are they bald? Why are they hairless? Because a baby is an unfinished product. It needs to mature, it needs to develop, it needs to grow up, it needs to advance, it needs to change. Esau was called Esau, meaning fully made, fully formed, because he was born and he was not hairless. He was full of hair. Now, why is this his name? This reveals a critical characteristic about Esau. Someone's capacity to change is directly proportional to how finished of a product they view themselves. Esau was someone who was, his essence, his name, is complete, made, done, finished, consummated, not lacking anything. I'm perfect the way I am. Change is a process of something which is not fully done. It's not finished. When something is under construction still, it's not in its final form, then it could be changed, it could be tinkered with, it could be adjusted. Esau, by his essence, was fully finished. He didn't want to change. He didn't need to change. The first event we read about Esau as an adult is that he comes home from the field and he's tired. And Jacob has this very delicious looking bowl of stew. Give it to me. Sell me your birthright. Esau agrees. Why does he agree to sell his birthright for a bowl of stew? How does he justify that transaction? He says, behold, I'm going to die. And therefore, why do I need this birthright? Now, what does this mean? So Rashi tells us. At the time, the firstborn, they were destined to perform the service in the temple. Today, there's the concept of the Levites. There's the Levites, the priestly class. They're the ones who do the work in the temple. But it used to be that was the original plan. Each family would have the firstborn. They would be the ones who did the work in the temple. So Esau, by right, has the ability and has the mandate and has the privilege of doing the service in the temple. Now, what does it mean? What does it demand when someone is going to do work in the temple? What are the requirements? What are the criteria needed? So Jacob told him, the firstborn does work in the temple, and work in the temple done improperly can result in the death penalty. Specifically, Jacob told him, if someone enters the temple grounds or a priest enters the temple grounds with long hair, meaning more than a month's growth, that's an executable offense. And a Kohen who does service in the temple drunk, it's an executable offense. If so, says Esau, the firstborn birthright, it's a death sentence for me. I don't want it. Behold, I'm going to die. Why do I want it? Take it, give me the stew. Esau was fully formed. When someone views himself as fully formed, a fixed mindset, the idea of change is just not part of the equation. Esau had long hair, and he liked to drink here and there. And he discovers that those habits are punishable by death in the temple, so he just equated the birthright with his death. Well, I have a different solution. Don't sell the birthright and get a haircut once a month. How hard is that? Don't sell the birthright and find something else to drink. Drink sparkling water. Coke Zero. Espresso. I have a solution, Esau. I have a solution. Why are you saying you're going to die? No, you're not going to die. You're going to live. You'll just look a little bit neater. A little buzz cut. And you know what? You may have to forfeit some of the Jim Beam when you go into the temple. That's not an option. In Esau's eyes, being the firstborn, having the birthright, means I will die. How does someone have that attitude? He's Esau. He is what he is. Change is not part of the equation. He could spend 60 years with Jacob, alongside Jacob. Jacob was able to bring out holiness and elevation in rocks. Esau was Esau. The red ruddy one was just not going to change. I am who I am. Take it or leave it. That will thwart Jacob. The stone is not resistant. The stone is just bereft. It's bereft, but maybe Jacob could find some holiness. He's able to elicit it. Esau is resistant. Why? I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change. I don't need to change. I don't want to change. That will thwart, will foil Jacob. If Esau is fully formed, what's Laban? I want to suggest that Laban is a different flavor of Jacob resistance. The word Laban in Hebrew is Lavan. And I remember hearing, and I looked at my notes, I couldn't find it. And I looked it up, I couldn't find it. But I remember hearing that the word Laban, Lavan, it means white, right? But it's actually an amalgamation. It's a mashup of two words. Lev, meaning heart, Evan, stone. Levin, Lavan. That's what I remember hearing. I have to do more research because I looked it up today and I couldn't find where it was kind of in my head that we spoke about this maybe once. I have to ask the official Parsha podcast archivists if we ever spoke about this. But I couldn't find it. Let me know if you find it. Laban is a stone heart. His heart was stone. It was impermeable. If Laban was, maybe if his brain, if his mind was impermeable, it would be fine. But the heart has to be a little bit impressionable. Laban had a stone heart. Esau, he said, change is not for me. I don't want to change. I don't need a change. For Laban, it was even worse. The idea, the notion, the concept of change didn't even register. Jacob is working for Laban. And they come up with a different agreement. You get the speckled and the spotted and the brown and all these different arrangements of compensation. All these different compensation structures. And whatever they agree upon, that's the animals that are born. And Laban changes it 100 times. Why does he change it 100 times? He tries one, doesn't work. So he tries something else, doesn't work. No matter how specific, ringed, speckled, brown, tinged goats, all of them were like that. So after 5 times, 10 times, you and I would have said, oh, maybe God's intervening here. Maybe me trying to fleece Jacob is not a good idea. But Laban is just insistent. He's persistent. He's relentless. He's just not willing to accept that. He doesn't get the message. He doesn't realize that it's futile. He tried to do something once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 70 times, 100 times. And he's still trying. And even when Laban himself comes up with an idea, it doesn't register. There's a fascinating observation here. There's a well-known concept that God makes matches. The Almighty is mesmerizing. He places people together. He's the matchmaker. And the Talmud says, we know this idea, it's true. It's based upon verses in Scripture and in all parts of Scripture. In Torah, in Nevi'im, in the prophets, and in Shuvim, and in the writings. It's such a foundational idea, you find it everywhere. Where is the source in the Torah that it is God who makes matches? It comes from Genesis chapter 24, Parsha Vayeitzei, 24:50. Laban says, after the arrival of Eliezer, and he meets Rebekah, and he makes the prayer, and she gives water to the camels, Laban declares, this is from God. We're not going to question it. Who's the one who teaches us the idea that God determines who is supposed to marry who? It's Laban himself. And what does it do in our Parsha? In our own Parsha, this very same Laban, he repudiates his own teaching, and he says, I'm going to do a little trick. I'm going to swap in Leah instead of Rachel. And his hypocrisy is just so obvious to us. The Torah endorses his statement. He declares it, and that's the source in the Torah for the idea that God is the one who makes matches. And his stone heart, he just is unable to see it. He misses his own hypocrisy. At the end of the Parsha, Jacob flees. After 14 years of working for both daughters of Laban, and then 6 years for pay, and Laban's changing the terms 100 times, he is unbending in his determination to take advantage of Jacob. He's trying to defraud him, to fleece him. Jacob escapes. And the Torah records what happened. Laban pursues him, and he has a dream in the middle of the night. And then the final standoff. And Laban comes and complains, why'd you leave? I would have made a big party for you. A goodbye party for you. Why did he steal my stuff? He goes to inspect in every tent. He can't find anything that's his. Jacob is the paragon of integrity. For 20 years, he's living with his in-laws, and there's not a single thing that belongs to Laban that's part of Jacob's camp. And at the end, Jacob unleashes a scathing rebuke of Laban. Vayan Yaakov. Jacob responds to Laban, and he says to him, what is my crime? What is my iniquity? Why are you chasing me? What did I do to you? You went through all my stuff. You examined all my possessions. Bring out something that's yours. Show it to us. There's not anything I took from you. And he goes through the history. I worked for you for 20 years. And your animals never miscarried. I took such good care of your flock. And I didn't eat from any of your stuff. And I didn't bring you any, if an animal was killed, I took the loss myself. If an animal was snatched from your flock, I took the loss myself. And I worked in the daytime and it was hot, and at night it was cold. Sleep fled from my eyes in my determination to be the best employee you ever had. He goes through the whole history. What happened? I worked for you for 20 years, 14 for your 2 daughters and 6 for your animals, and you switched my pay, my wages, 100 times. If not for God Almighty, the God of Abraham, and the dread of Isaac, you would have sent me away empty-handed. And now you see that God was watching over me and he's taking care of me. This is like a scathing indictment where Jacob details Laban's mistreatment of him. And it's logical and it's cogent and it's well-reasoned and it's unimpeachable. And how does Laban respond? He probably just coils up into a ball of shame. How could I have done that? I apologize, Jacob. Is that what he does? Verse 43, Vayan Laban. And Laban responded. What does he say? The daughters are my daughters. The sons are my sons. The flock is my flock. Everything that you see is mine. It's an unbelievable thing. Jacob makes an argument. He tells a story. He gives the history. And Laban says, no, it's all mine. Your daughters are mine. Your sons are mine. Everything is mine. He doesn't even address any of the arguments. He's completely unmoved by anything that Jacob said. He has a stone heart. Jacob argues and he presents evidence that every penny he earned justly, and he was mistreated by Laban. No, he said, flock is mine, daughter's mine, son's mine, it's all mine. Nothing moves Laban. Nothing destabilizes him. Nothing penetrates. Nothing makes an impression. Jacob can make an impression on a whole city, even on the rocks, but not on Laban. Not on Laban, because Laban was a lev evan, a stone heart. When Jacob was in a place, he was its splendor, he was its glory, he was its beauty. He would elevate everything around him. Everything, including the stones. Even people that didn't know of Jacob's existence, they too were elevated by him. His holiness just spread out and cascaded to everyone in his environs. Everyone was moved. Everyone, except for those immune to change. Esau was immune. Laban was immune. Esau was fully formed, fully made, fully polished. And therefore he was unwilling to change. He didn't believe like he needed to change. If someone has the Esau attitude, no matter what is given to them, no matter what catalyst is given to them to upgrade themselves, it won't matter. If there's a force that can transform rocks into beacons of holiness, into things desirous of holiness, it won't do nothing for them because they're fully formed. The first lesson of change is to not be Esau, to realize you and I were all under construction. So long as we're alive, there's room to grow, there's room to improve, there's room to fix. So long as the flicker of our soul yet burns, we can still improve. We can still rectify. Laban was even more corrupt. The subject of change was foreign to him, no matter what you threw his way. Even if he himself conceived of an idea, a true idea, his heart was made of stone. And therefore, he too was unmoved. Change is really the only thing that we are here to do. That's it. We're here to improve, to elevate ourselves, to elevate those around us, to make an impact. And there are all sorts of opportunities to change. Now, it's not likely that we'll get a chance to meet Jacob. And if we did, as long as we don't resist it, we would be elevated tremendously and immediately. The stones were there for one night. That's it. And we could talk to the stones and reason with the stones and caress the stones, and they won't move. They won't change. For Jacob, they suddenly became desirous of holiness. We won't necessarily have that opportunity, but we'll have other opportunities. And the Torah spends a lot of time detailing the very long story of Jacob and Esau and Jacob and Laban. And these are cautionary tales for us. If you are like Esau and you view yourself as being fully made, change is beyond you. If you are unimpressionable, stone-hearted like Laban, you will not be able to change. But alas, we're not like that. We realize that we're here to change. And hopefully our heart will be open to whatever messages, whatever catalysts, whatever impetuses are thrown our way. The Almighty wants us to improve. The Almighty created us with the intention that we would improve and elevate and transform ourselves. It's our job to be receptive to those messages, to open up our heart, and to realize that we're not fully formed. It's painful. It's very comforting to be like Esau. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. Pour the bowl of the red stuff down my throat now. It's very comforting because it's not demanding. It's the easy way out. The Torah spends a lot of time talking about this. Jacob could move mountains. He could find the impossibly embedded spark of holiness in an inanimate rock. But two people were resistant to him. And we must learn the lesson. I thank you for your attention. It's fascinating to go through these parshios. We went a little bit backstage today. Backstage! To take away a very valuable and invaluable lesson. You have yourself a wonderful day and an excellent rest of your week and a terrific, magnificent, stupendous Shabbos upcoming. And please God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.